Welcome back to bmb3 training on the STA Compact. By chance you just looked at the endurance, you saw I had a bent needle. We're going to go through mapping in order to try to correct that. Okay, I backed out, I'm still in the service. I'm going to go into the robotics. Robotics, down to mapping. We're going to map arm number 1. Not much to arm number 2. In fact, I can't say that generally for the most part you never have to map number 2 because it's a stationary arm. There's very little that can go wrong with it, or if something does go wrong, you should ask yourself why, because for the most part you should never have to map number 2 unless you've changed some component like maybe the back motor. We're talking about arm number 1, washing wells, first thing, and we're going to have to move back and forth a lot here, so I'm sorry. Arm number 1. Okay, now let's go into adjustment. F2 for adjustment. Alright, arm number 2 just went, arm number 1 just went over the wash wells. We've got a little tool here, it's a mapping tool. I love this thing, it's one of the nicer things Stago came up with. And what it allows me to do is put the needles in the dead center of my wash wells. Now you watch me. If these were new needles, in theory that should go right in. But since they're not new needles, I'm going to make some adjustments because these are just somehow, for some reason, have gotten bent. And I'm making the adjustments so that that needle goes straight down into wash well number 1. Okay, it goes right in. I'm going to put my hand in back, and there's a little wheel, and you want to be a little careful with this, meaning that you don't want to press too hard on the wheel, but I'm going to move it up so that you can see that the wheel is there and that you can do it, and you also see me manhandle the arms. Okay, now you can tell that that is going right into the center. I'm going to do the same for each needle. And needle number 3 is the interesting one, but regardless of that. Okay, and it goes right back in. Now that's fine. That just means that my needle is centered. Now we're going to go to needle number 2. You don't want to move the arm. You should have already, by the way, opened up the drawer at least once and closed it. Let the instrument do it because that would position it. Not critical, but yeah, that's what you should do. I just know because I went through endurance that the drawer has been opened and closed. And you see me bend it back a little. We're not talking about an awful lot. We're just talking about minor adjustments because there should be no kinks or anything in this needle. And now to arm number 3. Alright, let's put it down by hand. See how that's off quite a bit. And that's because it was bent. And we're not going to try to replace that needle. This is what I mean by saving yourself the needles, because there's nothing wrong with this needle. You can go back and check it out later, but the odds are that there's nothing wrong with that needle. But it is a little bent now. And like I said, if you saw me doing the endurance, you know why it was bent. Okay, for the most part, that goes down right into the center. By the way, a lot of times what I do is when I first come to an instrument, I take them and I put them all the way down. The reason I do is because you can tell if a needle has been bent, because in theory, this part is all locked in, so that this is always, even from one mapping to another, should always be correct, assuming it was mapped correctly the last time. I'm going to raise my needles up, take the mapping cuvette out. Alright, now I'm going to lower all 3 needles into the wash well. I'm going to go all the way down with all my needles. Now that is not where we're going to leave them. I'm all the way down. Now you've heard me talk about BBs getting caught in the wash well, and I think this is the main reason you do this, is I'm going to raise, they're all the way down, I'm going to raise each one just a teeny little bit, like a BB distance. Just a little. This is what determines how low these needles go into the wash well. There's the bottom. Here's how high we're raising it. just a little distance. Again, this is what determines the mapping of the wash well, determines that it's where the needles are going to go in the wash well, meaning center, and how deep Z movement, how far down there it's going to go. You can see from this you can't really overdo it. If you ever get a needle crashed into the wash well, it's either BB in it or some other problem like the gear being loose or something along that lines. Alright, we're good. Now I'm going to go back over to the screen and I'm going to hit F10. As you can see, it actually says Z movement here. F10 to validate. Now back over to my screen. It's all came back up, and now it's 0. And now we're going to go down to F4. F4 is really not is in drawer number 1, and it's not really that critical. But we're going to hit F4 anyway, just to do it, and we hit F2 to make the adjustment. By the way, one of the tips on the SGA Compact is to read the screen. Just read it. Put a tube in F4. F4, make sure it's all the way down to the bottom. F10 to validate. I'm just reading the screen. Okay, this should be in the center now. Notice that the only position on your mapping is for needle number 1. That's kind of it's good to understand this, because you're only mapping needle number 1 at this point. I'm going to take my adapter off. Then I'm going to do the Z part. If I do the Z part, this is where arm number 1 is going to take the needle, and from here it takes it to it maps it to all of the positions. So you need to get this right, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. And you have to go to the bottom because that is going to determine how low that needle can go. Now the unit's going to subtract a little and do some mathematical things so that it doesn't hit the bottom. It'll never go to the bottom. But for your purposes, you want to go to the bottom. And you can see I'm in the bottom. Now I'm going to hit F10 to lock it in. Again. And it's locked in. Now it's going to go to the home position. On position, and it's going to go to the wash wells. And just for grins and giggles, I normally do not do this. I'm going to hit F3 to test it, and we'll hit F10 to validate, and it goes all the way down into the needle. And I'm going to pick this needle up, and you see I got a little room, I got a little space in there. Normal, as it do this little subtraction so it doesn't go to the bottom, and that is what determines how low that needle goes.